Hey y'all, Charleston's first health and wellness festival is coming up in just a few weeks. Live Wild Fest is taking place May 4th and 5th at Holy City Brewing in North Charleston, and it is the first of its kind. Rather than being your normal health and wellness expo where you receive thousands of business cards, Live Wild Fest is entirely experiential. Join them for 2 full days of offerings from movement classes, meditation, cacao ceremonies, cold plunging, saunas, and more, and all of it supporting and uplifting local businesses. Each day ends with live music from artists such as Arizona, Matt Kearney, Evan Gia, and more. Whether you are new to health and wellness or you are a seasonal practitioner, this festival is for you. You will leave inspired, connected, and part of a community based on joy and celebration. So join them at Live Wild Fest this May 4th and 5th. They have single day or full weekend passes available now. The ticket link is livewildfest.com/tickets. Again, that's livewildfest.com/tickets. Holy City Center Radio, this is episode 249, and I am your host, Christian Sanger. Today is Wednesday, May 1st, 2024. Yes, it is the 1st of May, so brace yourself for the flood of memes I'm sure you will see all over the internet today. You know the one with Justin Timberlake. It's gonna be May. Be prepared. They shall be everywhere, I'm sure. Wow. 5th month of the year already. Can you believe it? I know we pretty much every episode, I'm like, can you believe it's this date? But truly, I'm always kind of surprised when I do the podcast. I'm like, man, is it really such and such date? So maybe you're bored of hearing it. I'm sorry, but I truly am just like, man, where does the time go? But in any event, maybe the time is going fast because I'm having a good time. I had a really cool experience on Sunday. So I'm going to talk about that first and then dive into the news. Unfortunately, this podcast, after this first section, it was not a great, weekend, not a great few days here in Charleston, where some of the biggest stories, unfortunately, were, 3 separate tragedies that occurred. And, it's never fun to talk about these things, but I think they each had a bigger story attached to them, and we'll get into that in a minute. So, first, some fun stuff. This past Sunday, I had an opportunity to visit 20 South Battery. At that address is this beautiful mansion, pretty standard looking building, that area of town, of course, right along the Battery. You may be familiar with it, if you see it in pictures on my Instagram and things like that. It is a very old building. It has been around for a long, long time. I don't have the specific date, but I know it even dates back just to being in publications to like 1872 is one of a publication that it appeared in, according to News 2. That link is in the show notes. So you can see some video that were taken by Hannah Powers, a reporter there who did a story, and I ran into there as well. She did a great job kind of highlighting, and whoever she had with her to be the, who was taking video, did a great job highlighting what this building is like on the inside. They talked to Dr. Jack Schaefer, who owns this building now. He did some massive renovations in 2020, has turned this into essentially like a bed and breakfast hotel, kind of hybrid, but also a museum in some ways, because there's just so many incredible artifacts in there and decor, some of which has, significant ties to Charleston's history. For instance, there's a letter in there that John C. Calhoun wrote. It's the actual letter itself. And, don't get me wrong, no fan of John C. Calhoun, but, it's amazing to have a document that dates that far back. And, someone who, for his many, many faults and terribleness, is a significant figure in history, of course, not just in South Carolina, but in in the nation in general. So there's things like that, but the property is just beautiful. It has a backyard area as well where they had some performers out there. It was beautiful weather. We're out in the piazza, being able to sit in rocking chairs, like this classic, like Southern, big porch type, sitting there, drinking some sweet tea, hanging out on the rocking chair. That thing you envision in your head when you think of, old South Charleston, as far as what the Battery must have been like. Just, it was a really cool experience. The property, like I said, is beautiful. They have several rooms in there, as well as they have like a carriage house in the back that has some rooms as well. I stayed in the main house on the second floor, which had its own piazza as well. So I was able to go out there, and the next, stayed overnight. So in the morning, I was out there having coffee, which was just, perfect, to be sitting out there just relaxing, enjoying my coffee, beautiful weather with, it overlooks White Point Gardens. It's pretty tough to beat. There's a really cool space on, I think it's like the fourth floor. They call it the library, and there's some old books in there, and some artifacts, and a beautiful window that overlooks White Point Gardens. And on the other side, you can see part of the peninsula, some of the church steeples and things. And so it was really great. So in addition to being able to stay there, which was awesome, they were also having a premiere party, sort of like hey, we're open, we're a bed and breakfast, to kind of, get people posting about it and talking about it, whether, someone's coming to visit the area and wants to stay there, or if you do a little staycation like I did. That was part of it, but also the fact that the property was featured in a PBS series called America, the Land We Live In. That series premiered back in March, but there's, more episodes coming out in addition to the ones that are already out there. And one such episode, as I mentioned, is going to feature this property. Now, going back to the history, there has been several significant people who have stayed on this property, have visited it for whatever reason. Winston Churchill painted inside the house. Governors, senators, mayors, generals, you know, any number of other luminaries, and according to Dr. Jack Schaefer, some secret societies as well, all met within those walls, over the course of a century. So a pretty interesting place with a unique history, and now you have the ability to stay there, which is pretty great. At that premiere party, it was announced that a donation was going to be made to the Preservation Society, which was actually founded at that property at 20 South Battery. So a tie-in again with the history of Charleston to this building. And as I mentioned, in addition to the main house, in the back of the property, there's an 11-bed boutique hotel. Hotel. That's a hotel for owls. Okay, that was dumb. I'm sorry, but that's what it sounded like in my head at the time. We're gonna leave it in. So there's that section as well, so you can kind of be off the main street. Which I will say, my room being in the main house with the piazza, facing South Battery Street and White Point Gardens. I could hear everything outside in the morning, when a garbage truck was rolling by and construction crews were coming out to do work around, and gardening people, so it was not easy to escape that sound unless I had put on the TV, or, I have an app on my phone that can do noises to help you sleep or whatever. So I will say that if you're looking maybe for a little quieter experience, that back section might be what you're looking for. So in any event, there's a link in the show notes if you want to learn more about the property, see what it costs to stay there, the amenities they have, or just marvel at the pictures and videos that are on the site, because it is a pretty incredible property. And I was lucky to have the opportunity to stay there, and appreciated that invite. So it was a very nice Sunday. I felt like very old Charleston, being at an event. I'm seeing all these guys in suits, even though the weather's like 80 degrees. I'm like, I don't know how you guys do this. And there's people out in the back having cocktails, listening to people singing, chit-chatting. It just had that very old school Charleston vibe, and obviously the property added to that. So it was just a unique experience all around. Other than that, fairly quiet few days. My parents have gone back home to Connecticut, which is definitely a bummer. My cat is happy that their dog is no longer here, because they're not exactly the best of buds. But I'm certainly bummed out that both my parents and, of course, the dog are no longer here. It was nice having them in my condo, our condo, really, and being able to just have them around, whether it was us hanging out, talking, going places, or just maybe I'm doing work and they're reading or, doing whatever on their phones. It's just nice to have them around, in the space, even if we're not actively talking or doing something. So it's been a little quiet around here. Don't have mom making dinner, which is a bummer. I've got to fend for myself again, like the terrible adult I am. But it was great to have them here, and I had an awesome time. So that's what's going on in my world. Now let's get into the news. Perhaps the biggest story in the Charleston area over these last couple days it is considered a big story because it's such a tragedy on numerous levels. But two 20-year-old women were killed in a weekend hit and run that occurred in downtown Charleston. This took place near the entrance to the Arthur Ravenel Jr. Bridge. This occurred on Sunday morning. And, sometimes when you hear hit and run, I think people immediately leap to drunk driver, which could be. We don't have a lot of details on this, but you're thinking, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. But the call came in at like 8:30 in the morning. So just another question is, okay, what exactly happened? Was it someone who was inebriated in some way? Was it just a tragic accident? Well, one of the reasons we don't have the details is because, as I mentioned, it's a hit and run. We don't know who this person is. More importantly, let's talk about the victims, though. The Charleston County Coroner's Office ended up identifying them on Monday, the 29th. And again, both are 20 years old. Lizzie Zito and Ariana Gamber. They were both from Simpsonville, which is near Greenville. Zito was a College of Charleston student that was studying psychology. And again, I mean, it's tragic no matter what, but the more details you hear about this, it just gets worse and worse. She died 2 weekends before she was expected to graduate. And you're thinking 20 years old graduating, that's pretty impressive. Yeah, it is. She would have completed her degree in just 3 years, which is pretty incredible. Now, at this point, there's not a ton of details about the other woman. If they come out, family shares it, what have you. Obviously, I'll pass that along. But that's why I don't really have any details on her, because so far only that little bit about Zito that I mentioned is what's come out. So, yes, they died near the downtown entrance to the Ravenel Bridge. Police say there's no indication that they were, like exercising or jogging, which I would imagine a lot of people are thinking, oh, maybe they were working out or what have you. Really don't know what they were doing. Not that it necessarily matters, but, people sometimes are interested. And really, again, because the person who hit them fled the scene, we know even less than you might normally in these types of circumstances. As I mentioned, that's really it as far as information that's been released. We know that the call came in around 8:30 a.m. on April 28th, which was Sunday morning. The call was about two unresponsive victims that were found off the roadway on Morrison Drive between Harris and Cooper Streets. And no one has been arrested in connection with the details, with the deaths, because as I mentioned before, there just really isn't a lot of detail. Perhaps the police have some information based on debris they found, or maybe there's traffic cameras somewhere in the area that they can guess maybe a couple cars that drove through at that time frame. But if they do have any of that information, they certainly haven't been sharing it publicly. So that's all we know at this time. Just an unthinkable tragedy. We have hit and runs that happen here, just like many other communities do, although it may feel like, and I had some people commenting, it does feel like maybe there's a little bit more here than other places. And there's groups here in town, whether it's talking about bike lanes or, or pedestrian lanes, just ways that making this city better for bikers and pedestrians. People definitely have been pushing for legislation or changes and things like that. And this is another indication of maybe that's an area that needs to be looked at, or, maybe changes have to come through. But we unfortunately just don't know a lot. And it's unclear what police may or may not know in terms of maybe they have some more information that they're just holding on to right now. But I would think if they had a vehicle that they were interested in, they might have put that out by now. So hopefully there will be some justice in this. We'll get some answers at some point in time. I'm sure if anyone out there has any information perhaps you were in that area at the time. Maybe you saw a vehicle driving erratically around that scene. Maybe you live nearby. If you have any information at all, I'm sure the police would like to hear from you, and hopefully we can get this thing solved. As if that tragedy wasn't enough, that same day that those two pedestrians were fatally struck on the peninsula, another pedestrian was killed by a train in the western part of Charleston County. So deputies with the Charleston County Sheriff's Office say they responded to a crash at a railroad crossing on South Carolina Highway 174 between Savannah Highway and Old Jacksonboro Road. They were called there shortly after 11:30 p.m. on April 28th. Again, that was Sunday. They released details the next day. Ultimately, the victim was identified as 50-year-old Tammy Dommings, and it was reported that she died from her injuries on the scene. No one on the train was injured. Other than that, no other information was released. However, the police did say this is an ongoing investigation. So if we get any more updates on this, I'll be sure to pass that along. And unfortunately, this trend of tragedies doesn't stop there. The final story we have today involves a fire that happened out on Folly Beach. The Charleston County Coroner's Office said that 61-year-old David Beltshoover died at 8:50 p.m. at the Medical University of South Carolina following that fire I just mentioned. The fire occurred at his home on Friday night. His family and friends, since this tragedy was made public, have come out, and other residents of Folly Beach have come out to say all sorts of wonderful things about him. It seems like he was beloved in that community. A lot of people knew him best from the parking lot that's behind the Rita's restaurant, where he worked as a parking attendant. He also resided nearby in a small beach shack, is how Live 5 News described his residence. So you may have known him just from that parking lot. You might not have known his name, but you now hearing that, you may, and if you see the picture in the show notes, he may look familiar to you since he was, so well known from parking, people's helping park people's cars, which a lot of us end up doing on the way out to Folly Beach. So a lot of great things have been said about him. Again, seemed like he was beloved. Some called him Super Dave. There's actually a memorial that's laid outside his home with seashells spelling out that nickname. There's also flowers, a signed volleyball, a Folly Beach T-shirt, and several other, kind of trinkets and tributes to him, including a picture that's hanging up. So the fire is still under investigation. Crews responded to it at around 7:42 p.m. on Friday. His home was in the 100 block of East Ashley Avenue. They were alerted to smoke coming from the attic of this residence, and that's when they got there. They had to force their way into the home. They were able to quickly put out the fire. However, once it was extinguished, they did locate the victim in a front bedroom. They pulled him out of the house. They attempted some life-saving measures on the scene. He was ultimately transferred to MUSC, where unfortunately he passed. The cause and manner of death have not been determined. I know a lot of times with these stories, when we hear that, it's like, well, you could probably figure out what happened, but you never know. There could be more to the story or details that are important to what occurred. So far, the cause of the fire has been labeled undetermined, so there's still a lot to work out here. And again, when there's more information given to the public, I'll be sure to pass that on. So unfortunately, as I said, just some sad stories, all tragic, but bigger picture with all of them, painting a picture of the victims and some of the impressive things they were doing in their lives, what people thought about them. And then also more details could come out that will affect the community, whether it's something with legislation involving, pedestrian safety, for instance. There's bigger pictures to these tragedies that, as time goes on, maybe there's things to learn from them or something good will come out of them. It's all you can try to do, unfortunately, when there's tragedies. Sometimes try to find the good that can come out of those situations in some capacity. Sometimes really the only good is just remembering someone who was a fixture in the community and appreciating them, for what they did while they were here, so that's why I think, in addition to the tragic side of it, why these were big stories. You're just hearing what people thought, especially in that story about the victim out on Folly Beach, David Beltshoover. Just what he meant to that beach town, and what people thought about him, and how well known he was. So hopefully we'll have some better news as we go into Friday's episode. And actually, now that I say that, I believe that, yes, Friday's episode should be an interview, and those tend to be good news, and help us learn about people in the community. So hopefully we'll have a much better tone for Friday's episode. But when it comes to news, sometimes that's just the way it goes. Thank you so much for listening. I know it was a tough episode to get through, and get details of these tragedies, and I appreciate you all listening. Thank you to Lindsay Marie Collins with LMC Sound System for producing this and every episode of Holy City Center Radio. And thank you to Tyler Boone, whose music you hear in each and every episode. That'll do it for now. I'll be back with you on Friday, like I said, with an interview that you don't want to miss. But until then, good night. Good luck.